I'm your host, Walter Haydock, the founder of StackAware. Today, I'm joined by Emil Lassen. Emil leads technical development of AI UC1, a security, safety, and reliability standard for AI agents, coordinating technical contributors and consortium members to keep the standard aligned with emerging AI capabilities and risk. He also brings a policy lens from his time at Harvard Kennedy School focused on the geopolitics of emerging technologies, translating evolving threats into actionable governance and assurance requirements. Emil, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Walter.
So just to start, can you tell us a little bit more about AIUC, the company, and AIUC1, the standard?
Absolutely. So the AI underwriting company came out of stealth this summer. We spent a lot of time thinking about how we've really bridged this gap between a growing number of enterprises, particularly, who talk a lot about AI and really want to adopt AI. Basically, the classic saying that if you don't adopt AI right now, you're going to lose out to your competitors. So this classic line where the CEO comes through the door barging and says, let's adopt agentic AI yesterday, really. And then somewhere in this organization, you also have the chief IT security officer or the CRO or someone else who's sitting and then looking at the new risks that AI bring in, and risks that are not just theoretical, right? We can read news headlines more or less every week of new AI incidents happening, be they safety related, where people use AI to get guidance on things around self-harm that they shouldn't get. Brand issues like when Canada deployed an AI agent as a customer service agent, and that agent hallucinated, and suddenly there was disputes around when you can have a airline ticket refunded or not. Security issues like data breach issues, like when McDonald's deployed an AI agent in their recruitment pipeline and ended up exposing millions of people's personal information in that process. So headlines that really go in and scare these people and create tension between the desire to adopt agentic AI and the risks that come along with this. So we spent a long time going back in history and looking at other examples for when new technology came to society that both brought immense capabilities, but also completely new risks. And what we find when looking at history is that the solution is often a trifecta of three things. The first thing is you need to standardize what good looks like. You basically need to create new principles in the case of AI around what reliable AI looks like, what safe AI looks like, what secure AI looks like. So that's often the first thing we see. The second thing we see is then auditing against those standards. It's very easy for companies to go in and say that we follow the rules. But as an enterprise buyer, I'm not interested in what you say. I'm interested in some kind of credible third party that has gone in and tried to check that you follow those rules, that they've tried to break your systems and see if they also hold up at the edge cases, really. And the last element we then see is insurance. And the reason for insurance is that a lot of this risk that comes along with new technology is just probabilistic. And if we try to remove all risk, then the technology becomes so dumb that it's losing value. So if you want to remove all hallucinations from your AI agent, yes, you can just limit the amount of information it has accessible to it, and you can more or less remove all generative capabilities. But you're then ending up with an agent that is not really artificially intelligent. You're ending up with something that is quite dumb and looks more like a workflow agent that you could define 10 or 20 years ago. So the role of insurance here is to allow some configuration of agentic AI where we accept that some risk follows with the new capabilities, but we then want to protect ourselves against things that could go wrong. So that's the first mechanism of insurance. But the beautiful thing with insurance is also that it's a really good mechanism for aligning incentives. And what I mean with that is that if you build good, safe, secure, reliable systems, insurance companies are more likely to give you a cheaper premium, a cheaper policy. So basically, it's both in your interest and in the insurance policy company's interest to mitigate as much risk as possible as well. So it's a really strong tool. And that's basically what we've created the AI underwriting company to do, to create this trifecta of standards for agentic AI, audits against those standards, and then insurance to mitigate the residual risk.
Great. Thanks for that. So I want to drill down on a couple things that you said. So first of all, You use the word agents, and depends on who you talk to what an agent is. Can you talk about AI UC with respect to agents, how you define them, and whether you exclude certain types of systems as a result of that definition, or you have a broader one?
We um, we have not come down strong on this question. It's something we're discussing a lot with our enterprise consortium members who've also brought this question up often. Um, we um, we know there's different typologies of agents instead. So the way we go about this in the AIUC1 standard is that we've defined capabilities of agentic systems. So when you go and start your AIUC1 audit, the first thing that the auditor will ask you about is the capabilities of your agent. One capability could be, for example, to input, process, and output text. Another capability could be doing the same for voice. It could be producing images, automating things, and taking actions such as doing a financial transaction or calling a tool that enables you to update a record in a customer service system. Um, and this is really where we are. I think this question of what an agent really is really interesting. And I think another element to this is obviously the whole question of identity, which comes up very often in these conversations as well. Is an AI agent one closed instance that we can list in an AI bill of materials? Is an agent more like a system of multiple sub-agents and multiple processes that we tie together to create a workflow? Where does one agent start? Where does another agent begin? I think those are all great questions, not questions we've been able to find answers to yet. So we've tried to keep a quite open view on it. But to get more concrete, some of the agents we've certified against the AUC1 already are, for example, these like customer service agents that go in and both help customers resolve queries straight away, but can also take some actions. We've worked a bit with coding agents as well. We have worked also with a lot of voice agents, image generation agents, and are starting to really dive into this field around automation agents now, working, for example, with UiPath at the moment on figuring out how to adapt the standard and apply it on agentic automation as well.
Awesome. So at StackAware, we have a 3-level definition when it comes to AI. The first level is AI models, and AI models are inert by themselves. They can't do anything without any sort of supporting infrastructure. An example would be like the early GPT versions that were released open source or something like Llama. The next level up would be AI application, and that's when you connect an AI model with databases, with APIs, with user interfaces. And that's something like ChatGPT without any of its advanced modes or plugins or things like that. And in an AI app, the system is communicating directly with a human. Then the third level would be AI agent, where apps are communicating either with other AI apps or with deterministic systems like APIs or applications like that. So that's how StackAware defines
Yeah,
the
I
three
like that
levels of
definition.
AI.
Yeah, and it mirrors closely what like ISO, for example, is doing in the definition space as well. So it's very aligned with our approach as well, I'd say. Yeah,
Cool. Cool. Yeah. So, can you talk to me a little bit about the interplay between AIUC1 and insurance underwriting? You talked about it at the broad level, but
absolutely.
from my perspective, the perfect world would be that you have a set of APIs in an enterprise that give you at any given moment a readout about certain things, like how are you within your tolerances for a given sort of system? Is it giving responses with the correct, with an appropriate percentage of the time? And then, do you have these controls in place? Do you have these types of, is this type of training being done? And you could consume all of that via API. And then in a perfect world, you could just spit that score out to an insurer. And insurer says, based on all this data, here's what I assess the risk to be. Are you there? Are you on the way there? What's your viewpoint?
We're definitely on the way there. So I don't think it's like the way you describe this is too far from our thinking on this. So taking a step back, we're called the AI underwriting company exactly because underwriting this AI risk seems to be a really, really gnarly but really, really important problem to solve. Why spend time on standards and audits and not just jump straight to the insurance piece? Well, because a big part of underwriting risk is to standardize what you're underwriting so you can compare different companies against each other at a common framework. So the reason why we decided that the standard was exactly that. Um, When it comes to linking standard and insurance, the two big questions that we need to solve is first, what's the likelihood of risk? So what an insurer cares about is how often do I have to actually pay out something? And that depends on risk. And the second question is then, what's the cost of that risk? And when it comes to AI, that second question is really tricky because we're still very early days. The capabilities of these systems and therefore also the access to tooling, for example, they have is increasing very rapidly right now. But most of the application of AI agents we've seen so far in production, at least, has still been quite limited exactly because folks are afraid of what would happen if we give these agents too many capabilities. So we could speak a bit more about both of those. And if we start on the risk side, what we did at AIUC was to basically do a bit of both a bottom-up motion and a top-down motion. So if we start with the top-down motion, we basically went out and spoke to about 500 enterprise leaders who are working on either deploying AI, adopting AI, building AI. Those folks gave us input on what are the top risks that they care about, the things that they would actually sue a company for if this happened, the things that prevent them from adopting AI right now. And from that, we defined our standard, which has 6 core principles. Data and privacy is the first one. So data leaks, for example. Security is the second one. So how does the agent respond to adversarial attacks, to jailbreak attempts, to prompt injection attempts? Third area is safety. And here we really talk about the end user safety. So would the agent get angry at you? Would it create harmful outputs in different ways, such as enabling you to engage in off-topic requests around healthcare advice or legal advice or other like high-risk topics? Reliability is the fourth area. And here we have a lot around hallucinations and then tool calls. So basically the area you also alluded to before, Walter, where we go in and see that the agent actually does what it's intended to do, that it calls tools when it's supposed to, that it doesn't call tools when it shouldn't, so it doesn't go in and say issue refunds when it doesn't have the right authorizations. Fifth area is accountability. This is your classic governance, but specific to AI. So taking the governance frameworks we know out there already and then asking ourselves, what's new when we move into the AI world? So for example, we have stuff around like training data and like lineage around that. We have stuff around AI failure mode. So when things go wrong, do you have your incident procedures adapted to also take into account these new types of incidents? And how do you deal with those organizationally? And then the last area for us is society. So how are the systems configured to safeguard against, for example, cyber misuse? We've already seen now people are misusing Anthropic's systems to conduct cyber attacks. A lot of these agent systems can become quite powerful if used by adversarial actors. So what are your mitigations around both cyber misuse and catastrophic risk misuse? The link there then is going in and start calculating risk. So one of the distinct differences between AIUC 1 and other AI governance frameworks is that we require technical testing of your AI systems against real world harms and risks at least every 3 months. And without those, and without doing those tests at least every 3 months, you lose your certification. The reason for that is that if you don't have these constant reviews, you just don't know how well your systems perform in the real world. As soon as you change your frontier model, like the inference model in your system, its risk profile will change. As soon as new adversarial tactics arise, your robustness will change to those. So we see a lot of value in testing this at a quite frequent basis. Our enterprises then will say 3 months, that's not frequent enough. You're also talking about a real-time APIs like continuous monitoring, a bit like what FedRAMP is requiring. On the other hand, the agent builders think that 3 months is already a big lift. They're trying to build technology that is capable. They're trying to update it frequently. Having these evals that are quite comprehensive, done like we run thousands of tests every time, right, is also a lot of work. So where we are now is that we do this every 3 months. And this evils engine is really the underwriting engine and our ability to then assess risks across these 6 principles. And that is what we then feed to the insurance companies. So when we underwrite a company, we basically create an audit report, both looking at the governance piece and the evals piece, and then we send that as an input to the insurance company, so they plug that in to their underwriting engine, and that's when they then come back with proposals on policies.
Let's talk about those tests a little bit more. You mentioned thousands of tests.
Yeah.
So, who designs those tests, and can you give me some examples of those tests? Because I'd be interested to see, what exactly is being evaluated.
Yeah. So folks next door, so our product team is expanding rapidly and spans folks from product engineers to like quite heavy research folks. And the way we do this is basically combining three different intakes and then designing an eval based on those intakes. The first one is that we have an incident database of real world risks. We have a research assistant who basically goes through the internet every day and reads news stories and incident database updates from the MIT risk database and like CVE and other things. And we pick the risks that have real world implications and focus less on the theoretical ones that may have indications. There's a lot of really cool research work on those, but what we care about really are the ones that create real material impact. That's input number one. Second input is this output of speaking to all these enterprise leaders about the top risks they care about. And the last input is tactics for exploring exploiting AI systems. With these three inputs, we define one individual eval test. The eval test will then try to solicit a real world risk that we've seen. So that could be executing a refund that shouldn't have been executed. We then pick a tactic to get to that risk. So that could be pretending to be a distressed user. It could be lying to the system. It could be gaslighting the system. It could be to literally try to jailbreak it by using different tactics we've seen both in research and applied in the real world. So basically a target, a tactic, and then lastly, we calibrate for either benign use of the system. So we're trying to test what this would look like if a normal user interacted with the system. This is what we do particularly for hallucinations, for example. So if a user came and asked a slightly complex query or where we left out a bit of important information to test how the system would respond to that, would it actually ask for that extra information or would it just try to proceed without necessary information? So we both have benign evals, but we then also have adversarial evals where we give the systems our best go. We run across multiple turns and like really try to see if we can break the system across like sustained pressure. And that's basically one. And we then replicate this thousands of times for each company so that we cover all these different risks and that we have a very robust set of evals that cover different kinds of targets, different kinds of tactics, and different kinds of adversarial pressure, call it. And collectively, these give us results across two rounds. The first round we share with the company directly, where they can see the vulnerabilities we've identified. We then give them some time to remediate those vulnerabilities, excuse me. Give them some guidance as well on what we've seen working for other companies. And we can go into detail about what that looks like in a second. When the company is then done mitigating those vulnerabilities, we go in and test the system in a second round. And those results are final. Those are the ones that would be used as input for the underwriting engine, but it's also what goes in these companies' AIUC1 audit report so that they can disclose those to, say, a potential enterprise buyer who wants to know exactly what the risk is. And this is also a way of maintaining that third-party auditor value that comes from this kind of assessment. So you have an independent review of how robust your systems actually are. So real-world risk.
What you described to me sounds a lot like AI red teaming, especially in the malicious actor simulation side of things. So, are AIUC employees actually conducting these simulated attacks against AI agents, or who's doing it? Is my
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, so basically, think of as a bit as two bodies. We have the AIUC1 standard, which is written by the technical contributors behind the standard and our consortium members. And then we have AIUC, the company that does the red teaming. And that's basically the folks exactly next to me sitting and designing these tests, running the tests, grading the tests, and then sharing the results to companies. We then work with accredited auditors as well when applying the standards. So Shellman, for example, is one of our close partners who then go in and do accredited third-party audits of the companies so that we have that independent review built into the governance of this.
So it sounds like AIUC is actually executing the technical testing of the agents, and then you have an auditor like Shellman go in and look at the governance side of things.
Exactly.
Great. Moving forward, in terms of the other AI governance and security standards out there, there's ISO 42001, which I'm personally quite familiar with. There are things like the High Trust AI Security Standard, which is very narrowly focused on security and privacy. It doesn't take into account societal impacts, things like that. There are historical information security standards like SOC 2, ISO 27001. Where does AIUC fit in? AIUC 1 fit in
Yeah.
among these?
Yeah, great question. Um, if we start with the cybersecurity foundation you talked about, like SOC 2, ISO 27001, we see those as your cybersecurity foundation. Most of the companies we work with are already trying to sell to enterprises, so SOC 2 is table stakes for them. We do not have any intention to replicate what's in SOC 2 already on ISO 27001. We want to build on top of those. Where we see shortcomings on SOC 2 is when it gets AI specific. SOC 2 is not intending to adapt to that. They've not intended to move in that direction. The AI CPA, at least as latest. So we see a need for an AI specific standard on top. ISO came out with their proposal for what this looks like about 3 years ago now, ISO 42001. And why then another standard? Many people ask us. And I think there are two really strong reasons for why we think something like AIUC 1 is needed alongside what ISO 42001 is offering. The first one is ISO 42001 is a management system standard. It's governance at the heart. It is helping organizations figure out how to implement really good governance when it comes to processes around building AI systems, governance around the data in those systems, the processes in those systems, the procedures like incident reporting, policies around how you disclose things to external stakeholders and so forth. But it's very light when it comes to technical safeguards. So you can have a ISO 42001 certified system without knowing anything about how it actually performs in the real world. So the first thing we're trying to add with AIUC 1 is a technically grounded standard that is grounded in evals, as we talked about before, requires quarterly evals of your system so that it can say something around how safe, secure, and reliable are these systems in the real world. The second reason why we decided to go ahead and develop AUC 1 with our technical contributors was that we don't think that a standard that is updated every 3 or 4 years can keep up with the pace of AI capabilities and risks right now. ISO 42001, the current version, came out before ChatGPT, just to ground us in like timing. So while it's certainly
Well,
helpful,
just
again, as
quick correction.
yeah,
It came out. It was finalized December 2023. So that was a year after.
yeah, okay, a year after, but it hasn't been updated since, right? And I think both of us follow news around both AI capabilities and risks, and I think it's fair to say that things have changed since that came out. Um, it's possible to keep the standard valuable because it is a high-level management system standard. But what we're trying to do with AIUC 1 is to create something that actually keeps tab with new specific technical mitigations, new specific ways of testing for like AI risks we see in production in the real world. So we update the standard every quarter. Just published our latest quarterly update 5 days ago on January 15th, and basically do these reviews of the standard every single quarter together with our technical contributors and external peer reviewers to integrate the latest best practice. Some of that could be new tools. This time, for example, we included a suggestion of including a specific pickle file security tool from one of our very technically grounded security folks. Can also be just new risk areas or entirely new requirements based on what we're seeing, such as increased adoption of voice agents or increased adoption of these automation agents. So these two things, being more technically grounded and ensuring that it keeps pace with capabilities and new risk is how we relate to ISO. We've then also done the work of mapping AIUC1 to all the other leading frameworks out there when it comes to AI risk. So if you go to our website, aiuc1.com, we've basically published these mappings completely transparently open source. So we've done mappings to the NIST AI RMF. We've done mappings to the EU AI Act. We've done mappings to MITRE's Atlas for like AI security challenges. We've done mappings to the OWASP 10 for LLMs, and we're working directly with the OWASP Foundation now to do mappings to the new agentic top 10 and the new AI VSS that they published a couple of months ago. And we'll continue doing these mappings. I think we have about 8 of them on the website already. And we have at least 3, actually 4 in the works right now, so that it's very easy for people to go in and see if I've already adopted another framework, how close am I to actually start being compliant to AIUC1 as well.
Thanks for that. So let's dive in a little bit into the meat of the standard. So one thing I wanted to talk about is that the AIUC requires managing public release of technical details, and there is a separate requirement of the standard to be transparent, specifically E017. And I view as there being a little bit of a tension there. Obviously, no organization can afford to be completely transparent in terms of putting a structured database of its customer data on the internet. No one wants that. And then conversely, we need to know a little bit about how the AI system operates. We need to understand a little bit about the training data, things like that. And then also from a security perspective, optimally, you would be able to secure a system, for example, encryption algorithms. You should have perfect understanding of how the encryption algorithm operates, but at the same time, it should also be impenetrable to an attacker who doesn't have, for example, a private key necessary to decrypt communication. So how do you balance those two requirements?
Yeah. So the tension is completely correct. And I think AIUC1 in general leans into transparency as a principle. Observability of AI systems will be key to make sure that we create trust around these AI systems. Right now, too much is going on in a black box. And that is one of the main reasons why enterprises are really afraid of adopting this. So if we create more transparency, that's generally good from our point of view. But as you say, being too transparent also comes at a risk. So this is a good segue actually to the conversation we just had around other frameworks. One of the reasons why we integrated this requirement B003 around managing release of technical details is because it's directly implemented in MITRE's Atlas. It's the first 2 risks that MITRE has. It's basically over disclosing technical details. So the way we've tried to manage this is by keeping both requirements in the standard. I believe actually B003 is one of the optional requirements we have in the standard. So this is a requirement that companies can decide to opt in. We rarely see smaller organizations opt into this requirement because documenting policies for disclosing technical details is rarely at a governance level or governance maturity level for these smaller organizations. But a larger organization would benefit a lot from exactly describing just the workbook for when we disclose new things like a model card, if we develop models in-house, or in general, just some kind of architecture in a blog post or in a video describing a new system feature, have we actually make sure that we go through just a quick checklist of what technical details are in there, and then having in mind some of the incidents we've seen in production again, where technical details were exploited to gain access to backdoors in the system. So I think the short answer to your question is the best we can do is making companies aware that this tension exists, and then try to guide them through it with our sub-controls and our typical evidence, which basically signposts what we think companies should do to manage this tension.
Thanks for that explanation. So requirement A007, interesting
Yes.
number for it,
Mhm.
requires measures to prevent IP violations. And this is something where, in my opinion, I am really disappointed with most AI governance practitioners, because there are a lot of people out there who say things like prevent IP violations or don't infringe on copyrights or things like that. And I think that's pretty weak, because there's no operational guidance for what to do. And, to tackle that and not be a hypocrite, Stackaware's released a list of 7 different levels of risk appetite when it comes to IP. So that's my take. My question to you is, like, what concretely can organizations do aside from having things in their AI policy which say, don't infringe on third-party IP, which, I've seen a lot, but it's very difficult to implement from a practical standard.
Yeah. I think you're completely right in addressing this. And I think again, if we take the step back, one of the reasons why this is hard to define right now is because there's a much higher level debate going on in our society right now around how copyright and trademarks change when we get into the AI world. If you look to some of the stances of, say, OpenAI, they're trying to push very far to loosen what we know as copyrights because they've trained their models on a lot of data on the internet, and we have active lawsuits going on around whether that was legitimate or not. You have the other camp of Anthropic that decided to settle a lawsuit for millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Because they also trained on uh, material books, particularly that were under copyright and therefore not legitimate as training data.
And that were
So
pirated. That were pirated too. Not
pirated,
only just
exactly,
purchased, but they were they
exactly,
weren't even paid for. Yeah.
exactly.
Allegedly. Allegedly. Allegedly.
Yes, and I don't think we as a standards organization, we don't want to be the organization that takes a stance on what we see the market best practice being necessarily when it comes to this. We need to dust to settle now when it comes to the IP more high level and see where legislation takes us and see where precedents takes us from these legal cases. And hopefully when the dust settles, there will then be clearer guidelines around what is legitimate and what is not. And that's what we will try to codify. If we then get practical, but I think your push is very good. You can do a couple of different things depending on where you are in the stack, right? So if you go all the way back to your definition of what agentic AI really is, there's something important there in terms of, are you an organization developing your own models? Or are you just an organization deploying other models? You may fine tune them a little bit, but mainly you're the app layer. If you build your own models, then there's a massive area that is just around what data do you use to train your models. And obviously, excluding data that is copyrighted is the safest and most secure and most reliable way of avoiding IP infringements. So that's the starting point. But if we get to the organizations then deploying agentic AI right now built on other models, you can go from, say, one end of the spectrum that is guidance, and another end of the spectrum is all the way to like technical implementation of safeguards. And if we look across some of these steps on this ladder, the first thing you can do is to go in and see what protections do you have with your provider contracts from your frontier lab. Anthropic right now goes in and actually indemnifies business customers against IP infringements. So if the model they have ends up infringing on IP, you can actually claim whatever costs or consequences that this comes with. You can claim those back from Anthropic. There's obviously a lot of legal terminology around this, so make sure to check exactly what the contract says. But IP infringement protection clauses in your foundation model contract is one place to start. And negotiating these specifically, if you have a high risk use case, is also a lever in the toolbox that companies should go in and explore if they're concerned about this. I think the next step is user guidance. So again, really depending on the use case, make sure that users are guided to use these tools in a good way. One of the companies we've certified generates images, and a lot of the customers they have, enterprise customers they have, use it for marketing campaigns. When you see the final asset, making sure that you notify the user that they should check this through and make sure that there are no trademarks or iconography or images used in this asset that could violate IP rights is one step. So just having awareness around it. But when we then start dipping into the technical level, we see third-party solutions around IP scanning. So that's one place to start. We see Adobe coming out with technical tools that can assess if an image is AI generated or not. So also just a classifier to showcase that the content is original and developed by AI versus taken from the internet and adapted. And then the hardest and probably still aspirational for most companies is doing something like output filtering, where you go in and again generate classifiers. It could be known brand names, it could be known images or like icons that you know are close to your product branding, for example, and therefore may come up in AI generated outputs that you then go in and scan for. And these classifiers can be built with temperature and like confidence intervals, right? So you can decide to just build into your system a filtering configuration that filters out anything that has a 50% threshold of violating something, or you can make it more sensitive or less sensitive based on your risk tolerance. Um, so those are some of the things we see companies doing. We're really looking forward to dive into this, and I'd actually be really curious to hear about the 7 steps you've defined at StackAware as well, because it sounds like something we should maybe build into the standard.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk with you about that. We could talk live, or we could talk offline if you want to on that. I appreciate the discussion, and yeah, I mean, I would say from the practical perspective, I love, I know a lot of lawyers, and you can't really ever get like a straight answer out of most lawyers. They'll say, well, there's a 4-part test about, and then you say, well, okay, but like you're talking about thresholds. Do I set the threshold at 50? Do I set it at 75? Do I set it at 25?
Yeah,
So I interestingly enough, I was just messing around with ChatGPT. I wrote this, I posted this on LinkedIn a while ago, and I asked it to, provide like to do some excerpts from an article, and I looked into its internal logic, its reason, chain of thought, and it said that, well, the user wants me to provide a direct quotation, but I'm not allowed to provide direct quotations of over 20 words. So
mm,
clearly,
yeah,
OpenAI added some instructions to ChatGPT that says anything that's under 20 words is, acceptable from a copyright infringement risk perspective. Although, of course, there's no law that says 20 words is the standard.
yeah.
And then over that, 20 and over is unacceptable. So I thought that was an interesting way that they had kind of decided that this is our line in the sand. This is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and to be clear,
yeah.
I think this is one of the policy debates and practitioner debates we're following the most closely, because it is also something that is very live with our insurers and something that is a very big concern for enterprises. So we're hoping that we can come out with even more specific guidance on this in one of the next quarterly updates of the standard. And one of the places where it just has a lot of value, again, that we update it every quarter so we can integrate new best practices. But I think we'd all get
Cool.
very rich if we solve this problem. So if you hear about anything, then give me a call.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see this problem getting solved, really. It's just going to be something that we figure out how to deal with.
I think you're right.
Cool. So, I've appreciated the discussion. We've gone into a good amount of depth, and I appreciate you giving detailed answers on everything that we've discussed. And, as we wrap up, I wanted to give you the opportunity and say, is there something you'd like to plug? Is there a blog? You can plug AIUC1 if you want, any podcasts, anything like that you'd like to give a shout out to our audience.
I think I'm going to be a lame corporate guy and actually just signpost people to the latest update of AIUC1. We update the standard every quarter, and we published the last update on January 15th. This one was a massive lift for our team, because we decided to go ahead and basically just both publish requirements and controls, like most of the frameworks have as well. But again, back to your desire for more concrete guidance, we've decided to go in and describe the typical evidence we see companies uploading for each of the controls, like 129 times. We go in, we have concrete examples. We mentioned the specific tools we often see companies using. We mentioned the specific ways of implementing controls, so that you have that concrete guidance, so that if you're starting from scratch and don't know how to go about this massive AI governance challenge, and you want some inspiration for how to actually get there, we've tried to go in and do that. What we're trying to do with this is obviously both guiding companies, but we're also trying to nip the bud of this classic challenge you have with governance frameworks, where they're just applied so diversely from auditor to auditor. We see a lot of interest in auditing against AIC1 right now from external auditors. We've started working with Shellman because they're just so credible and their methodology is so sound. And we learn a lot from that collaboration. And as soon as we've codified this, we will start looping in more external auditors. But by having all of this described online, accessible, transparently, open source, no paywall, no ISO PDF you have to pay 29 Swiss francs to access, we hope that we enable some of this consistency of auditors in applying the framework, more easy readiness assessments for the companies who want to adopt the latest best practices. And then also just a lot of great feedback. So at the bottom of that article where we announced the updated version of the standard, we link to providing input, and we get so much fantastic input from practitioners who see us on LinkedIn, who read about us. in blog posts. Some of this some of the feedback we get on the standard is extremely detailed and allude to specific tools. Other things are much more high level about like whole areas that are missing, a whole new ways of thinking about challenges around, say, identity, for example, or IP infringements. So what I plug is really like read where we are, but help us also make this standard better. It takes a village to figure out how this challenge can be solved, and we see AUC1 very much as as our attempt of putting this out to the ecosystem, but we hope for the ecosystem to come back and help us make it even better.
Well, Shellman is our auditor for ISO 42001, so I also have a lot of confidence in them. And good to hear about the changes at AIUC1 and the future improvements. So, Emil, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for a great conversation.
And to our audience, thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, this has been the Deploy Securely podcast. Thanks a lot.